thank you for tuning into the very first episode of Dancer Spotlight. This one will feature my lovely dance photography client, Keara Durand. She has a really fantastic story, and I'm really happy she got to share that with me. She's had some crazy challenges in her dance life and equally impressive triumphs as well. So I really hope you guys enjoy listening, and also I think it's really inspirational because she reiterates the idea that it's never too late to achieve your dreams and your goals. I'll also be chatting about her photo shoot with me as well. As you watch the interview, I've added lots of videos and photos throughout to help sort of illustrate the different stories about different parts of Keara's life that she mentions. So stay tuned and thanks for watching.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I want to start out by just having you give me like the basic rundown about like how you started dancing and how old you were.
Sure. So I started dancing right before my 4th birthday. So I was 3, which was pretty young, but my older sister danced. So I would always go to classes and watch her dance. And it's actually, my mom asked me if I wanted to start dancing, and I originally said no. So I almost didn't start dancing because when I would watch the older girls in class, I would get really intimidated and it looked kind of scary. But my mom was like, no, it'll be fun. Just go. You'll love it. So I went to my first class and I loved it. And then by the time I turned 5, on my plane ride home from my first All Scotland. So it took off pretty fast from there. So that was really the start of it. And then I would say I was 12 when I stopped dancing for a little while.
Okay. So when you first started dancing, did you take to it really quickly? I mean, or did you feel like you were just sort of going with the flow? I mean, it sounded like you started competing really early, but
yeah.
Were you more into like being in the studio, or were you very into the competitive side as well?
I was very into the studio aspect of it, I would say. My personality pretty much I'm a perfectionist. So for me, the joy always came out of spending time in class and like working on perfecting everything more so than the competition. But that being said, I also did compete a lot when I was little, especially, so my sister is 7 years older than me, so we would go to feshes every single weekend, and I was always the first competition and she was always close to the end because we were so far apart in age. So I would dance in the morning and then I would just spend all day at feshes watching people dance and watching the older girls compete and everything. So I definitely did love the competition aspect and I loved going to feshes and competitions, but I would say that some of my favorite memories definitely came from being in the studio.
Were you and your sister competitive with each other, or was it nice to have each other to sort of like have a dance buddy all the time?
Yeah, it was nice to have her. Honestly, I would say she loved the competition aspect. I loved the practicing aspect. It was really nice, even though I wouldn't admit it when I was 7, but it was really nice to have an older sister who knew what she was talking about and knew what she was looking for. And she was always the more creative and the more she loved the whole performance aspect of it. And that part, since I loved being in the studio, I always struggled with. So I would say she helped me a lot with that. But we weren't really competitive with each other or anything. We were so far apart in age and we both definitely looked for different things out of it. So it wasn't very competitive between the two of us, no.
Do you have any, maybe they're vague, but like any early memories of dancing, maybe like in the studio or competing, just anything that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I would say my first memory of dancing was when I was in preschool. I remember on St. Patrick's Day, I would always go in to my class and dance for my class. And I'll never forget, there was a kid in my class who he and his dad played the bagpipes. So his dad came into the school and he and his dad played bagpipes and I danced down the hallway. And that was my favorite St. Patrick's Day ever. It was so much fun.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it was.
Well, I mean, and the style was so different back then. Like, were you like in your school outfit and like really big
Yeah.
poodle socks and
Yeah, I was in
yeah.
like a just like a pleated skirt and like a blouse. Yeah.
And so about your like competitive career as like a younger dancer, were you placing really high or did you not care? Like, what was sort of your attitude towards competing?
I was definitely really competitive from day one. I started, I would say when I was probably before like 8 years old, my under 7 year or under 8 year, so I was seven competing under eight. That year I was in prelim, and that year we fetched a lot, and I won like all of the fetches. I have this picture of me in like my American Girl doll outfit at the end of the year with all of my trophies because I was so excited. So I moved into open when I was under eight. So I was very competitive from very young. And then as I had said, I stopped dancing when I was 12. As I started to get into those between like 10 and 12 years, I started growing a lot. So I was struggling a lot with pain in my Achilles and just growing pains in general. And then I started kind of not placing as well. And then it started to become hard because it started to become a question of, did I still love dancing even though I was really struggling competitive wise, and I was in a lot of pain when I was in the studio, so it wasn't even like it was enjoyable even though I wasn't placing as well. I think that would have been a little bit easier to handle, but it was hard to be in the studio and I wasn't placing very well, so it really just became a question of, was it worth it for me to keep dancing, because it was just a constant cycle of pain and a lot of disappointment, honestly, in my competing.
Do you find that like the way you placed in competition had a huge effect on your like your outlook of like your dance life?
It did and it didn't. I think when you're young, it's easy to kind of brush off if you don't do well, in the sense that I didn't take it as like a personal attack. It was more, I would look at the comments that I got from the judges that weekend and I would go back and I would show them to my teachers and I would be really determined to work on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think so, because I always loved it. And I think I loved that there was always something to work on and there was always something to improve. And even though for a lot of people, I feel like that could be daunting because you never really perfect it. But for me, it was like the ultimate challenge that there was always something that could get better no matter what.
Yeah, and that's part of the fun of dancing, right? It's like
Mhm.
knowing that there is truly no ever any end.
Right.
Like it's a constant journey to discover more about your dancing, and
And
that's what keeps people coming back.
like as styles evolve and as new moves and new tricks come about, like there's always something new and coming around the corner, and there's always something that seemed impossible a couple of months ago, and then you work on it, you work on it, you work on it, and then you all of a sudden look back and you're so impressed with yourself just in how far you've come. Competition or no competition, it was really always just about seeing how much I could improve as a dancer more so than the competition aspect of it, which is
Yeah.
why I think I loved being in the studio so much.
And so, how old were you when you decided to stop dancing?
I was 12. I had just danced at my first Worlds, and I remember leading into that Worlds. So I danced, my first World was under 12 because my teachers judged my under 11 Worlds. And I remember leading into it that it was all ice and Advil and pain because my Achilles was just seriously in so much pain. And I went, that was in Philadelphia that year, and I went and I danced at the Worlds and I didn't recall. So I was definitely super disappointed and I was in so much pain. And I remember after the Worlds just saying to my mom, you know what, I think it's time to go to a doctor and see what's really happening and what's going on. And I had a broken growth plate. So I was in a walking boot for like 6 months after that. And that was pretty much the answer to my question, because they pretty much said you can't really dance until this is fully healed, and it's not really going to fully heal until you stop growing, because it's going to keep breaking if you keep putting the kind of pressure that you were putting on it. So it kind of made my decision for me.
Was that upsetting, or was it sort of like a way out? Were you relieved?
Yeah, honestly, it was both. It was upsetting because I loved dancing so much, but at the same time, it wasn't really the same dancing that I loved when I was little, because it was a lot of pain and a lot of just trial. And so I think it was a little bit of both. I was definitely disappointed because I wish that I could have danced the way I did when I was 7 forever, but it was sort of my mom always says that it was sort of a blessing, that it was just like I was going to keep being in pain and I was going to keep being disappointed. And it was kind of just, it would have been a hard decision to make for myself. So it was easy that someone made the decision for me, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And so what was the gap between when you decided to stop and then when you, spoiler alert, came back?
Yeah. So I stopped when I was 12. I came back when I was 15, turning 16. So I was out for 3.5 years. I
So when you
came back.
left, did you think that was it forever?
Yeah, I didn't hold out much hope that I was ever going to be able to dance again. I did a couple of things. So I was going into my sophomore year of high school when I decided to come back. Through middle school and through freshman year of high school, I tried everything. I did every sport. I played volleyball, I played softball, I did kickline, I ran track. I did everything I could to try to find something that I could really get passionate about and something that I could really find that same quality in. And it really made my decision for me, that I looked at my mom and I said, okay, I'm not growing anymore. It's been 4 years and there's nothing that I've found that filled the void of dancing. So she said, all right, I'll reach out, I'll email them, I'll see when classes start up, because it was over the summer. And I went back in August and I danced at Oireachtas in November, which was definitely a time crunch. After taking almost 4 years off, it was definitely a time crunch.
I love what you said about you trying out other sports. Basically, it sounds like a lot of people do this, like either when they stop dancing or they retire, they try to fill that void with something. Mm-hmm. And it's like a constant search to find that community and intensity, something that's very, like, it's a very precise art form, but there's also this very tight familial feeling to it. And it's really tricky to find that again. And adults are looking for that after they finish retiring. And it's just interesting to hear that you, at that young age, were also looking for that. So I guess it doesn't really matter how old you are. You always want that sort of community and connection.
Yeah. And whether I was consciously aware of it or not, I think that it just sort of, I was so driven to find something, because I couldn't, for the first time ever, like if one of my friends at school texted me and said, hey, do you want to hang out on a Friday? Like, I could go. And honestly, I didn't love that. I was like, what? I always had dance. I always had something to do. I always had a commitment to something. And I think that was actually what put it to me. Was I remember sitting there, and one time someone asked when I was available or when I was free, and I was like, whenever. And that was so weird to me, because I was never free. I always had dance.
I think it's that rigidity almost that we miss, like knowing I have to do this every week in order to achieve this goal, and just sort of having measurable results every week that can give you a sense of satisfaction. When that disappears, it's really hard to know how to deal with that.
Right.
And yeah, even at a young age, like even if you weren't aware, you knew like something was missing when you were available on Friday night.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, this is what it's like to just be a kid going and hanging out with your friends, and it was so weird to me. Yeah, I definitely didn't think that I was going to be going back to dancing, but I think I got to an age where it did become a conscious forefront decision, where I realized that all of the pieces that I was unhappy with where I couldn't really find fulfillment in another sport, and that I did still have a very open schedule, and I realized that going back to dancing was really what would make me the happiest at that point in my life.
All right. And so what was it like going back? Was it like a slow uphill climb again, or did the pain come back, or were you afraid?
The pain definitely didn't come back. I have to give so much credit to my mom. Right before I went back in, she was like, Keara, I just have to warn you, it's not going to be the studio that you left 4 years ago. Like, the world moved on for 4 years. It's going to be a very different situation. You're walking into different people dance there now. Like, the people that you used to dance with maybe had grown up and retired or gone to college or whatever it was that she was like, this is a clean slate and it's a start to a completely new journey for you. And I walked in. Honestly, the reason that I went back to dancing also was the Worlds were in Boston that year.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, great. My plan was to do one more Worlds. I was like, I'll do one more Worlds. It's in America. I don't even have to travel that far. And my mom was like, here, you haven't danced in 4 years and you think in 3 months you're going to turn it around and qualify for the Worlds. But I was dead set on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back, and honestly, I worked a lot with my teachers when I was younger. It was always like the newest choreography. I always had the newest choreography. I was always challenging myself. I was always trying to do the trickiest things and all of that. And we came back and they sat me down and they were like, if you really want to try to qualify for the Worlds on a 3-month timeline after taking that much time off, we need to go simple. So it was definitely a change from what I was used to, that I was definitely on, if something was hard or tricky or I wasn't getting it after a couple of weeks, we would scrap it, we would take it out, we would simplify it. And that was a change for me because I was always a person that was like, well, this is a challenge for me and I will perfect it. And there just wasn't enough time to give it the time that it needed to work on all of it. And the style had changed and I hadn't been there for 4 years. So I was so behind on the current style of dancing. So I definitely brought out some old school vintage material for that first Oireachtas because it was what I was used to. It was clean. It was solid. So that was definitely a big change for me at the beginning.
That's like a great example of like the whole mentality of like training smarter, not harder too, right? Don't get me wrong, like I love the tricks too, but I think it shows that you don't need to do tricks to have beautiful dancing.
Absolutely. That was definitely, I mean, it was a mental game in a sense too, because I would look around at the other girls who they were my age group and we were all in open and they were on much harder steps than I was, but I just had to take a step back and realize that at the end of the day, if I wanted to reach my goal, that was what I had to do. So it was that I couldn't take it as, again, a personal attack. I couldn't say, oh, they don't think I'm good enough, or, oh, they don't think I can handle it. It was really just, I had set a really aggressive timeline for myself, and that I had to realize, and I think this is a big lesson in just trusting your teachers and trusting the process, that like they're always looking out for your best interest. So I say this from 15 until I retired when I was 21, that if they ever took me off of something or gave me something else, that it was always because they were trying to give me the best opportunity, not because they didn't think I could do it or they didn't think I could handle it or anything.
Yeah. Well, I also don't think we've said who you danced for, so maybe you should mention that now.
I danced for Karen and Lisa Petrie for my whole life, from when I was 3 years old and probably still in diapers until I was 21.
Full circle.
Full circle. They watched me grow up.
And so it turns out that Boston was not your last Worlds.
Well, Boston, actually, coincidentally enough, I did qualify at that Oireachtas, which was amazing. I think other than this past year's Worlds, that is probably my favorite result, just because it was really the definition of, I set a goal and I went for it and it worked out for me. And it was just the greatest sense of accomplishment that I was like, I didn't make a mistake in coming back to dancing. I knew that I had something ahead of me still. So anyway, I was training for that world, and I was still running track at the time. And I was at a track meet probably 3 weeks before the Boston Worlds, and I broke my ankle, so I never danced at the Boston Worlds.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
No,
so
no.
I did not dance at the Boston Worlds after all, even though that's why I came back to dancing.
But how was that? Was that devastating?
Yeah, that was absolutely devastating. I really thought that there was a curse around the Worlds, that I was never supposed to dance at the Worlds, because it was the Achilles going into that under 12 Worlds, and then I broke my ankle going into the Boston Worlds. And then as soon as I got over that, I was like, oh, okay, well, I didn't dance the Boston Worlds, I'll dance the London Worlds next year. And at that point, we had accepted that it wasn't just one Worlds that I was going to dance in Boston, that I was full-blown back to dancing. But another spoiler alert, I trained then for the next year's World, and my teachers judged the nationals that year after Boston, so I didn't dance that. So I only had one opportunity to qualify for the Worlds. And I did not qualify for the Worlds for London in 2014. So I was still waiting to go to the Worlds. Yeah, that was also definitely disappointing. So it was not a straight shot back to the Worlds.
And so, which was the World after London then?
After London was Montreal in 2015. So at this point, I was a senior in high school, and I had danced one Worlds when I was 12, which was hard to wrap my mind around when I went to the Worlds. That I thought it was so intimidating, because at this point there were people who had been dancing Worlds on the world stage for how many years, probably 7 or 8 Worlds at that point, and I had danced one, and my last memory of dancing at a Worlds I didn't recall. So it was definitely intimidating. And even though at that point I was definitely on the mend, and I was kind of settling into full-blown being back into dancing, and I was 2 years into being back, and I was, as we had said before, I had sort of started to simplify everything. Like, I was getting back into being able to handle choreography again and being comfortable. But that year I did recall at the Montreal Worlds, but I was actually the last recall spot going into my set. Was definitely, I eked right on in there, but I walked away from that Worlds pretty much just knowing that I couldn't be intimidated at the Worlds, that it was really hard to be. I would say the hardest part of that Worlds was being 18 and being at my second Worlds, and knowing that it just kind of felt like imposter syndrome, because I was like, everyone else belongs, and I'm only dancing my second Worlds, and everyone else, like, it felt like there was already kind of a
huge leap you have to make. Yeah. Yeah. And it takes so much courage and like inner strength to even convince yourself that you're ready, when being 18 and a dancer, you're so old, you're ancient at that point, right?
Everyone's retired and I'm just getting started.
Yeah. So it takes a lot of personal strength to like be okay with that going in. So do you think you started to get more comfortable after that World, and then it was like game on?
That World, I would say, was my turning point. That I went to the Nationals, is the next competition after Worlds, and that was in Providence, and that Nationals I came 5th, and that was, I would say, that was really like the spark that went from there. It kind of went up, because that was, I guess, kind of the result that I needed to be like, okay, I can compete with like all of the people that were around me within that clump, had recalled at the Worlds and had been dancing at the Worlds. And it was that affirmation where I was like, okay, I do belong here, and I can be competing with all of these people. So I would say that Montreal Worlds was really the kick in the butt that I needed, that I could do it.
Was that like a crying on stage moment when you found out you got 5th?
Oh my God, absolutely. I really, before results, it was actually always my sister would do with me. We would sit there and we would basically she was always pretty accurate with where she has a very good way of being as unbiased as possible for being my sister. And she would always write down what she thought I was going to get before I would go up for my results. And she was usually pretty accurate because she was like, I usually actually would be more harsh than I had to be. So she was like, I would think in my head what you were going to get and then give you a couple places higher, because she's like, I would be overly critical because I was trying not to be biased. And we would sit there and we would basically, she would be like, okay, worst case scenario, like, what do you think based on how you danced today? Like, where do you think you might fall? And we would do that. And then she would be like, what would be the happiest? Like, couldn't even believe it. Like, this would be amazing. And I remember sitting at that nationals and I was like, if I got in the top 5, that would be, I would be so excited. But I would also like, so then we were just kind of talking through scenarios, and usually she would be very honest and she was like, Keara, I do think that's realistic. I think you could be in the top 5. And I guess that could be risky because at the same time, it could go on stage and I could not get top 5 and be like, oh, we thought that could be a thing. But I trusted her enough to think that if she was saying that it was a realistic thing. And I ended up being 5th that day. And it was just incredible. That was the best.
Yeah, it's hard to find like a middle ground between like believing in yourself and not having your expectations so high that you feel like all your hopes are dashed, right? So you get to protect yourself a little bit, but you also can't doubt yourself, and that's a hard place
and
to be.
It's a very vulnerable place to be, to have hope and to not go on stage being like, well, I have no idea. Like, you kind of have to have some sort of confidence in yourself when you're dancing. Especially, I mean, when you go on stage for results, like, the dancing's already happened, the results are in, there's nothing you can do to change it. But it's more a conversation we even have at the beginning of the day, where we would talk about, like, based on your training, based on how ready you feel, like, what do you think you can make of this competition? Like, what do you think you can do here?
She sounds like you're a sports psychologist.
Yes, she is. Definitely.
And so your last Worlds was 2019?
Yeah. So just the couple of, so I went, Montreal was like 45th, I think I ended up. The next year I jumped and I got my first Worlds medal. I was 13th at Glasgow. And then I was 16th in Dublin. And then I was 9th when we went back to Glasgow. And then after we broke that barrier of top 10 at the Worlds was really the push, where constantly in the studio, the talk was not, we're going for top 5. It was, how do we get you into the top 5? This is what we're going to do. And that was without a doubt from the national. So I was 9th at Glasgow. And then that nationals was Orlando, and I was 6th. And then I was going into a double age group, actually. So they were like, it's going to be harder, but we're going for it. And after the nationals, we basically had this whole long conversation where it was like, every competition leading up to next year's Worlds is a stepping stone. And they were like, you might win the Oireachtas, you might not win the Oireachtas. You might get top 10 at the All-Irelands, you might not get top 10 at the All-Irelands. Like, we don't know what those are going to be, but they're like, everything is going to be leading into the peak at the Worlds. And I didn't win the Oireachtas. And then I was 9th at the All-Irelands, which was only like 5 weeks before the Worlds. So that was actually definitely a bit of a mental hurdle, because it was only 5 weeks out and I was 9th with the same people that I was going to be competing against 5 weeks later. So in my head, I was like, how realistic is it for me to think I'm going to break the barrier of the top 5 when this is where I stand only 5 weeks out? It's usually a really good check-in. But those 5 weeks, I would say, I never trained harder. I don't think I took a day off between the All-Irelands and the Worlds. And it was the most positive and reinforcing and uplifting environment for those 5 weeks, because overall as a studio, I would say we had a pretty good All-Irelands, and that was just, everyone was on the same page of pushing each other and training smart and encouraging each other. And I just remember after class, like, I would be talking with some of the girls and I would be like, we would genuinely say to each other, like, oh, I'm proud of the work you put in today, or like, you worked so hard today, or like, that was great, you pushed yourself so hard today. It was just such a positive environment for that 5 weeks.
Everyone had your back.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just felt like you had so much support. And I really do think that makes all the difference in the world, is coming from a place where everyone is included and everyone is on the same page. And it really does start with just a few people, because you're always going to have people who might complain that they don't feel like doing this today, or are negative. And it's really just about creating a positive studio environment. As I said at the beginning, like, I've always been a studio sort of dancer, and I've honestly struggled with getting it on stage the way that I can in the studio. But it's all about, for me, creating a positive space, because even if I walked in and it felt like everyone didn't feel like getting it done that day, then it was like, all right, well, it's on me to rally everyone to make it
boost the morale.
Yeah, exactly. Because it was like, you're not going to bring me down, I'm not going to bring you down, we need to go through this together.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then tell me what happened at Worlds.
So that was the first 2-day Worlds that we had, which I really thought was going to be hard for me, especially mentally, because...
So did you go in knowing this was going to be your last one?
Yes, I said it. My teachers were like, Keara, don't say that. Don't put such a definitive end on it. That's so much pressure to put on yourself to say this is my last one. But I was like, the same way that I knew it when it was time to come back, I knew it was time to be done. And I was graduating undergrad, and I just knew that it was my last competition. And I mean, it made it bittersweet those last few weeks, and it probably is what made me so positive in every single class, because I definitely cherished every class going into the Worlds, because I knew that it was some of my last. But yeah, I said definitively, I was like, nope, this is my last one. No matter what happens, I'm done after this. It was a 2-day Worlds. I really thought that was going to be really tough mentally, because I was like, well, what if I don't have a good first day? How am I going to kind of rally for the second day? Because like, the first day's scores get scrapped. So it was basically just like, well, as long as you make it into the second day. But I wasn't so concerned about that as I was about my own mental space, where I was like, well, if I have a bad first day, who's to say I'm not going to have a bad second day? So that whole negative thought process kind of was in my head for a few weeks when I found out it was a 2-day Worlds. And then I was like, this is all a mental game. And on the flip side of the coin, where you're saying, what if I have a terrible first day? I'm like, what if you have a great first day? Then you're going to feel great on the second day. So it was just catching myself in that negative thought pattern that really made the difference for me. And I went into the first day dancing it like it was the day where the results came out, and I had a really good first day. And I was honestly, very strangely enough, the most relaxed I've ever been. And I think it was more just because I had this peace of mind. I knew how prepared I was. I knew how hard I trained. And for the first time ever, I really, truly just believed in myself, that I was like, there's no way that this isn't going to turn out the way that I'm hoping it's going to turn out, because I just was so content with how hard I had worked. And the first day went really well. And then I just remember going back, I slept really well, which also never happened. I slept really well going into the second day. I was so calm. And the second day, I would say the same sort of dancing got on the stage as the first day. And it was just that every time I stepped on stage, there was no doubt in my mind that it was going to come out the same way it does in the studio, which is always the conversation. They're like, you don't need to do anything more than what you do in the studio. You just need to get that dancing on stage, which normally it would be less than I would do in the studio, which is not ideal, obviously.
I think a lot of people try to suddenly bring out a part of themselves that they've never seen before in the studio. And I think that's where a lot of people have trouble. It's like they try to overachieve on stage.
And then you haven't trained that hard, and then all of a sudden you're burning out on stage because you're pushing way harder than you do in class. And I really do think I enjoyed my time on stage the most ever during that Worlds. And I definitely think that's a piece. It's so tricky because it's hard to enjoy your time on stage when you're competing. But at the same time, at the end of the day, that is what radiates the most on stage. So it was kind of a never-ending cycle of just let go and enjoy your time on stage, but at the same time letting go of that make-believe control that you think you have over the result is a level of vulnerability that you can't force on someone. They just have to be ready for it. And I think for the first time I was ready to just be vulnerable, that I was like, if this is truly my last competition, I don't ever want to walk away with a regret, thinking I could have put more on stage, thinking I could have done anything differently. And I was like, this is your last time on stage. Like, just enjoy your last time on stage.
It's funny, though, how it takes something as big as your approaching retirement to have you reach this level that you seek your entire like dance career, competitive career, to just dance because you enjoy what you do. And we all need something to get us there. Which is it's just an interesting thought.
It is. So it was definitely a thought that I had so many times over the few years, especially being older in dancing. As I was saying at the beginning, like, when you're young, you don't really process it that much. Like, you're not as much of a mental, you're just like, okay, I didn't do that well today. Okay, I'll go back to the studio. Like, you just aren't thinking as much. So it's really hard not to let the mental aspect of it come to you when you are 20 years old or 21 years old and you have the full capability of processing everything and overthinking everything. And it's something that I struggled with a lot, where it was like, if you would just let go, you would probably do better. But I couldn't let go, and then I wouldn't do better, and then I couldn't let go, and then I wouldn't do better. And it was just that frustrating cycle until, as you said, something so definitive as retirement, where it was just inside of dancing or outside of dancing, it was a life moment that I didn't want to ever regret.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying this, it's just a true metaphor for life, right? Everything you do in dance is transferable to other life challenges.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess when you were waiting for your results, I'm like, how did it feel? Had you already calculated that you were going to get?
Nope. That was one Worlds we never ever even dabbled in, because it was just such a different situation. Like, there was just no way to ever know where you were going to end up. But I do have to say that, like, with the dancing that I had put on stage, I went back to my room and I took a nap before results, which never ever happened. I was so at peace with the dancing I had put on stage and the fact that I was done dancing, that I was like, I will never dance on stage again. I was so at peace that we went to results. And of course, as soon as they started calling it, I got nervous, but it was just, I had never been so calm and relaxed and at peace with whatever was going to come. And of course, they do the reverse countdown at the Worlds, where they're going from the lowest place to the highest. And I was, it's so hard not to, no matter what, even if you think you put good dancing on the stage, to be like, please don't call my number. Please don't call my number. So
it's almost harder to just listen to the results than it is to dance.
Oh my gosh. My best friend Taya and I always say, just slip the result under my hotel room door. Just slip it under my door. I don't even want to go to the results. Like, I don't care. It's done. But yeah, once they got to 6th and I realized that I was in the top 5, I genuinely didn't even know what place I got until after everything was like done and they were going back saying, like, in first place this name, in second place this name, in third place this name, because I didn't hear anything. I was running down the stairs to my teachers as soon as I realized I was in the top 5, and I could have been 5th. I had no idea what place I was. I was like, I didn't even hear it. I was like, what place did I even get?
And do you remember being on stage, like, with your trophy like on the podium? Do you remember that, or is it kind of like a blackout
No,
situation?
that I do remember, especially because like crowds or like people are allowed to go like right up to the stage. So like all of my teachers, all of them, and my mom and everyone, Karen and Lisa's mom and dad, who are the best, they were right up there videoing. Like it just felt like my whole dance family was just like there, and it felt like a moment that I shared with them because they were right at the stage. They were 10 feet away from me. So the entire time I'm like waving at them, I'm smiling at them. It felt like it was like my own ceremony because I was just like so zoned in on all of the people that have been there for me my whole career. And then I slept like a rock for like 12 hours.
You reached out to me a little while after, is that right? I'm forgetting exactly when you reached out to me.
Yeah, I reached out to you in May. I was graduating from school and I was done dancing, and I had seen you. I think you had just photographed Nora and Jillian,
Yes,
and they both dance for Darty Petrie as well. I remember just seeing some of the shots that you had posted on Instagram of just a few of their shots, and I really thought that it captured some of my favorite parts about, especially knowing the two of them, some of my favorite parts about both of their dancing. And I do know their dancing very well, and that I really was like, you really did just capture their grace and their strength and all of that. And I was just so impressed by that I was like, I really want to have a way, especially right now. I had just been at the peak of my dancing career, and I was like, I want to capture what my dancing is like right now.
Yeah.
And it definitely, like, as we were photographing, I think as time went on too, like we started to really home in on what I was most comfortable doing. And if we tried something and it wasn't quite working, we'd be like, okay, just moving along, we'll go to something else, we'll do something else.
Right.
But we definitely photographed like all of the things that I loved most, which is amazing.
I'd rather focus on the positive and what you love and what you're good at, and work towards that. It's never like a definitive, you must do X, we will get it right.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was just thinking the other day about the shoot, because it's been a little bit of time, but I generally remember most things about all my shoots.
Yeah.
On the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
And it was pretty quiet, and you were in your big flowy black dress.
Yeah.
So good. And yeah, I really enjoyed those first few parts because we got really like artistic sort of conceptual photos, which I really love. And then we moved on to your solo dress. And your trophy, and I love those pictures of you against that wall with your trophy. Those are some of my favorite.
Yeah, I love those. Those are, I think one of them we have framed hanging in my sister calls it the favorite child photo, because we don't have that many pictures downstairs. We had actually just moved into this house, and so it was all pretty much just like decor. And then there's one picture, and it's just like that picture of like me with my globe against the wall, and my sister's like, oh, the favorite child photo.
This is the one of you with the Manhattan Bridge behind you and like the taxi cab on the side, right?
That one is hanging like up our staircase. So again, that's why she calls them our favorite child photos, because they're just such beautiful pictures. My mom's like, I have to hang them everywhere.
And what was it like from like the working with me on the photo shoot to like seeing the photos? Was it like very shocking to see the final results, or how did that feel?
It definitely was, because again, I'm like a very perfectionist sort of person, and I was definitely nervous that, and whenever you get pictures in competition, it's always action shots, and sometimes you're cringing through them and you're like, oh, like I do not look the way I thought I looked while I was dancing. So it was definitely a welcomed change to just see all pictures where I just looked, it captured exactly how I feel when I'm dancing.
Yeah.
And we saw all of the pictures, and I'm like, this captures how I feel in the studio, outside of the studio. Like it just shows exactly all of the things that I loved about dancing, which was not that I didn't expect it, but at the same time, I didn't expect it to capture it that well. That I just looked, it just seemed like it radiated out of me that I loved dancing so much, which I do. And it was just so exciting to see that in a still photo.
Do you have a favorite photo from the shoot?
I would say my favorite photo is actually, I love those ones at the end against the colorful backsplash that we had.
Oh, yes.
It's like that like last wall. But those really are, that last sequence of pictures really are my favorite because it just felt like my shoes are behind me. It just felt like so metaphoric for what I was trying to capture, and that it was like my dancing career as a dancer was behind me, but it's still, to me, captured that I'm walking forward, that it's like my shoes are behind me, but I'm walking forward. Like, it just truly captured exactly where I was headed in dancing, and that I was moving towards becoming a teacher, and that my dancing was behind me, and it just, to me, just seemed like a very symbolic picture that I really loved.
That's a great way to think about it. Like, you are at peace with being done with your career, but yet you're moving forward with all the knowledge you've acquired from all those years of hard work moving forward. That's great. But then I got to bring up the birdie because I remember asking, did we actually photograph it? I can't remember now.
Yeah, we did. I just remember you were like, "Are you good with birds? Can you do birds?" I was like, "Yeah, pretty well."
Yeah, you were so like nonchalant. You're like, "Yeah, maybe I could try." And I asked you, I'm like, "Can I see it?" And you just like blew me out of the water with like the most perfect bird ever. And I remember I took a slow-mo of you doing it because I was like, "This is magnificent. I must show the world." And I remember posting it, and people like freaked out because it's really like just like the perfect technique, like coming into it, going up and landing, like it's just perfection. And I think I remember asking like, how did you do this? And I think you told me that you did a lot of cross training through track and field and hurdles, and that was a big part of it.
I did a lot of cross training. I honestly, when I did track, I did not run. I was not a distance runner. I was not a sprinter. I didn't do any of that. I jumped actually, which helped a lot with my dancing, which I didn't realize at the time. But I mostly did like triple jump and long jump. But it like really helped me in being able to like spring off the ground and like all of those. I mean, I spent every day after school, I would spend an hour training how to jump off of the ground. I would do like box jump exercises, like all of these different things that I didn't realize were going to help me in dancing. But yeah, that definitely helped. And I would do, it was terrible at the time, but I would do in hard shoes. I would just stand in front of the mirror at the studio and literally just do standing birds. Like I would just stand from nothing and just do like right bird, left bird,
No
right
running.
bird, left bird in hard shoes. Like it was, oh my gosh, it was terrible at the time, but I would do that because we had birds everywhere. And I was like, okay, you can either make this look weightless or you're going to look like you are really struggling to get off the ground. So I did it in hard shoes so that I could do it in hard shoes, and that when it's in soft shoes that it's even that much lighter. But yeah, I did that all the time when I was dancing, would just like stand still and just do like bird after bird with like no run up, nothing. I was just jumping off the floor.
It's like your superpower.
I didn't even realize it at the time. It wasn't like we put them, they weren't like, oh, birds are your specialty, we're putting them everywhere. They just kind of like, they were everywhere in all of everyone's choreography. So it was basically just like, well, they're everywhere, so you can either get good at them or it's going to be something that you struggle with forever, because they weren't going anywhere.
Yeah. You sort of out of necessity became a
perfectionist.
Because like you said, you're a perfectionist, and
Yeah.
you're like, these are everywhere. Game on. I'm gonna.
Exactly. There were a few moves that I definitely like when they came about, I was uncomfortable with, but I was like, well, they're not going anywhere, so you can either get good at them or like there's no other alternative really, because they're here to stay. So
yeah. So the photos, like, are they like in your room? Like, where have you put your photos?
They are all over the place. We've framed a few, so they're hanging. I have a couple in my room. And then we have the like box that you sent them in. And every time we have company over, my mom brings them out and she's like, look at these pictures that we got. So yeah, they have so many people who have, if you visited my house, you have seen the pictures.
That's so great. Yeah, because I always tell my clients, like, one of the pros of having the portrait box that I give you is you can take it out and like show your dancer off if you're a parent to everyone who comes by.
Yep, Mom has definitely done that. Anybody who has come to our house has seen those pictures, for sure.
That's so great.
Yeah.
And so now you're studying for your TC?
I took my TC, actually. I took it in January. So that is out of the way. That was a stressful test, but it was really, honestly, one of the most rewarding and exciting experiences. I don't know if a lot of people can say it, but I really do have such a fond memory of the whole weekend of taking the test, where it was another one of those things. Like, I knew how prepared I was. I knew it was where I was meant to be. I knew that it was the step I was supposed to be taking. And I knew that I had prepared as much as I possibly could for it. And it really just it was honestly an honor to be able to once again represent Karen and Lisa and Darty Petrie and just say, like, okay, I'm moving forward in a professional manner now. And that like, it really just felt like the best way to show respect to the world that I've been a part of for so long, that it was like, I respect the people who shape the dancers and that I want to be one of those people. Yeah,
you're really only as good as the people who influence you, right? When it comes down to it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's great. I love that you like wasted no time between finishing competing and
Nope. I was like, this is happening now, or it's not. It's actually, I took it in January. I was looking to take a test that summer. So I competed in April at the Worlds, and I was already sort of studying like as I was finishing dancing, and then I would have really amped up the studying if they had a summer test, but they didn't, because I knew I was starting grad school. And I am so glad I took it when I did. If I hadn't, I probably would have had to wait 4 more years, because the first semester was hard with grad school, but I was able to study, and I took the test at the very end of my January break. So I had a whole month of not having school. So I was able to study. And now school is just absolutely taking off. It's like completely time consuming. There's no way I could have put any additional information into my head. So it was definitely a do or die sort of situation where I had to do it then, or I would have had to wait for sure.
Yeah. Well, I guess also for everyone who's watching this, tell them like, what are you studying and how's that like?
So I am in grad school for audiology, which is a 4-year program. It's a doctoral degree. So it's a really it's a clinical doctorate. So it's a very clinical based program. So I'm going to be doing a lot of rotations like all throughout Long Island of like hearing internships and everything. It's really cool, honestly, because a lot of times when I'm sitting in class, I'll ask about music and rhythm and like all of that kind of stuff. And while it's not really technically related to what I'm learning, at the same time, I'm like very interested in like our perception of music and like why we love music so much, and like why, if you're a dancer, that like certain music like really resonates with you, and why we want to listen to music so loudly. Like it's like my nerdy side of Irish dancing coming out, because it's just like, I love all of that. I would say the only other thing than Irish dancing that I'm as passionate about, that I really do love.
That's great. I want to refine my earlier statement that birds are your superpower. I think multitasking and time management sound like your superpower to me.
Yes, that is definitely something that I had to get very good out of necessity again. But yes, multitasking is when I'm honestly, it's when I'm happiest. Like my mom always says, when I have a 15-hour day is when I'm at my happiest. Like when I am just like scheduled and jam-packed, that's when I'm my happiest. That's productivity is like the love of my life.
That's so great. I love that. Well, Keara, thanks for chatting with me. You gave us all so much to think about and so much inspiration. It was great just chatting with you about it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was so much fun.
All right. Talk to you later.
Okay. Bye.